Hi, this is Shady Atia, professor at Liège University in Belgium, and today I'm going to present you content analysis. Content analysis is a method under qualitative research methodologies. This presentation is part of a playlist on qualitative research methods. I would like to advise you to see the previous presentation, mainly a presentation called Qualitative Research Methods. Well, when we look at the different epistemological or research methods or research approaches in the scientific world, we can group research under two categories: quantitative research methods involving modeling, empirical and experimental approaches, and qualitative methodologies. And today, under the qualitative methodology, I'm going to focus on content analysis. Previously, I explained what is qualitative research, what is systematic review, and here today we are focusing on content analysis. Well, don't forget that some researchers, they select to combine qualitative with qualitative, and in this sense we call it the mixed research methods. Well, when we look at qualitative research methods, there are two types of data collection. Mainly one is focused on people and one is focused on document. When we talk about content analysis, it's mainly focused on documents. Well, therefore, the presentation audience is mainly researchers who are preparing a research thesis or a dissertation or a conference or journal publication in relation to content analysis. The aim of this presentation is to enhance your capacity to conceptualize, design, and conduct content analysis-based research. I'm going to explore the definition of content analysis, what are the methodological approaches, how to do data processing, how to validate our content analysis, and finally some learned lessons. Let's start with content analysis, what it is. Simply, content analysis determines the presence of certain themes or concepts within some given qualitative data. It can be text, it can be images, to quantify and analyze the presence, meanings, and relationships of such themes or concepts. And in general, content analysis is considered one of the desk research. What are the types of desk research? First of all, systematic reviews. Secondly, content analysis and historical analysis. Those are types of desk researches which are considered as research methods under the qualitative research methodology. Well, content analysis is simply looking at transforming a large amount of text or images into a highly organized and concise conceptual structure. We try here to have a systematic process to ensure objective analysis, and we do qualitative data treatment for text or images, and we start with looking at a process called coding. Coding process is simply to organize communication content, whether it's textual material or visual images or illustrations, according to communication schemes. And we look to identify content relevant to our research question in general, and the findings subjected to quantitative and qualitative analysis, or both, are dependent on that. Well, now what are the types of content analysis? We can use it to characterize responses in open-ended surveys, questions, for example, focus group, and interview transcription. So it's not only transcripts or manuscripts that are already published or available, or documents or archives or records. I can also do content analysis for an interview that I conducted, for example. I can do a content analysis for the report of a focus group discussion. So simply, it's a technique, it's a method that allows you to go in depth in any content and to analyze it, structurize it, and to come out with the main concepts and structurize them in general. And we look also to another type when we look at the evaluation of content trends in journals or magazines, public records, newspapers, textbooks, or cookbooks. You can even conduct content analysis when somebody is performing an interview with you and you want to highlight what was the focus and the terminology and the words and the concept, the ideas that are there. And here we can also start a concept analysis, content analysis. So content analysis depends on the purpose, but it's simply that you have a content and you try to analyze it in order to structure it and make a meaning out of it in a short and brief way. Some examples or characteristics of content analysis when it's done in a qualitative context: we look at examining meanings of the content for the development of text images theories based on researchers' knowledge and evidence drawn from the study. And the process involves identifying the relevant data, coding and generating themes based on the underlying meaning of the data, and it involves using themes to address research questions. So this is part of the content analysis. Now, what are the major methodological approach of content analysis? Well, in general, we have to go in a certain process. We start to choose the data sources that we will work on, code this data, develop some categories, assess the validity of the reliability, and finally start to analyze our results. So these are the major steps when we do content analysis. And we can have a certain approach when we do a content analysis. We can have a different approach. Either it's inductive, so we try to examine without any preconceived notion or category, and here we are not having any theory in background, we just have the data and we are looking at interpreting it. We want to explore general relationship. Or we can follow a deductive approach, where we are having a predetermined keywords and categories and variables, and we want to check are they present in this text or not, and this is what we call is the deductive approach. In general, when we talk about the methodologies to do for content analysis, either we have to have two main axes. The first of them, intent. We have to determine the analysis purpose and the type of outcome data that is desired. Do we do here inductive or deductive approach? Are we examining the manifest of obvious or hidden content? Do we look at deeper meanings that are hidden behind the terminology, or we're just taking the words literally as they are? What are the methods of validity? What are the methods of reliability? So this is the first thing when we start to do content analysis. We look at the intent in general. And the second part, we look at the technology. So how are we going to do that? Which is mainly through computerized coding. So we start to code the data and try to put it in a computer to make sure we can have analysis. Now, how will the content will be examined? There's two approaches. Either we focus on the manifest. So here we look only on visible meaning at the surface level of the text. And here we are just looking at coding and keyword searches. And some people, mainly psychology, people working in the psychology field, they're looking at the latent approach, where we are looking at deeper meaning implied in the text. And here you need to have an expertise in this field in order to conduct more interesting and debatable interpretation of what is behind what was said, what was behind what was found in the content that I'm analyzing. Now, how to do the data processing for content analysis? Today, in our modern world, we do it through certain steps. We get familiar first with the data. We revisit the research objectives to make sure that we have a clear question so that we do not get lost in the process. We identify the patterns and the connections, and then we start to develop a framework that synthesizes or summarizes our understanding of our analysis. So, one of the major steps that we need to learn when we do content analysis is to do coding and classification. What is coding and what is classification? Well, coding is simply segmenting. We start to divide the data into meaningful analytical units. And those meaningful analytical units, we start to code them. So we make segments of data with symbols, descriptive words, or category names. And we start to group these codes under certain categories. So keep the continuity, develop master list during the coding, and we start to read the text and we develop the codes that corresponds to the concept, the main themes that are addressed or that are found in the text, and we start to code them according to common or recurrence in the text. So this is the first step when we do the coding. Well, what is coding in general? There is different types of coding. Either we do inductive coding, so developed by researcher by directly examining the data, or we do a priori codes, so they are brought to the research study or developed before examining the data. So we have already a code with our assumptions, or we can do co-occurring codes, so partially or completely overlapping codes, same lines or segments that can have more than one code. So these are the different approaches when we do coding. And for sure, in deductive studies, codes might have been predefined, whereas in inductive studies, coding is vital to look for the unexpected. So this is the main difference between inductive and deductive approaches when we come to coding. And in general, I use the inductive coding method because I try to, without pre-assumptions, try to interpret the text and come up with interpretation or a summary of it. This is an example for a coding process that is used in a software. And as you can see here, this is the text. So when you have the content, you can upload it in a software that treats the information. So this is the text. Once you have a sentence or a term or a word or a concept, you start to highlight it. You highlight it, you directly connect it to a specific code that you developed and created that relates this theme or this text to the code, and simply the software can localize this code connected to the document and directly link it to the location, and from there you start to code your whole text. Every time you find a term on your list, you have a list of codes that you are already developed. Every time you find somebody or something written on this code, you start to identify, and later on the software will count how many times this code was mentioned. For example, here the term maintenance was found 46 times in the document, and I can click on the word maintenance and I find all the quotations where it was found. So this is the way how to structure my content, and simply coding softwares help you to code and help you to draw a framework later on to group these codes under categories that are meaningful, and finally you come up with a framework of understanding. So when you select the main codes for your study, you have to group them under categories. And for sure you will find out that not all codes are important. So you will need to eliminate some codes that are not relevant to the study or do not bring much in relation to your research question. And then you start to categorize them. And these are the most important steps. This is the most important step that you need to do. Moving from a code to categories. So this is a higher level of understanding, and this is a higher level of analysis. Well, how do I do the classification, and how can I move from coding to categorization? You need to count the number of times a code was mentioned. You need to categorize the codes into primary and secondary categories to make sure what is important, what is less important. You need to recode and choose the best fitting code names for a cluster of topic among concepts in relation to your research question. And then you can come up with your framework of understanding that summarizes all this large content into a meaningful interpretation. Well, once we are done with the categorization, so we coded, we categorized, we go now building our conceptual framework. A conceptual framework is done the same approach not only in content analysis, we do the same approach when we do content analysis for interviews or focus group discussion. We start by coding, and from the coding we come up with a theory or with an understanding, and we create a structured vision on the topic and insights on the topics. So this is the main purpose of content analysis. Well, how can we do that? For sure there is manual approaches and there is computerized approaches. I advise you to use computerized approaches, but for sure it depends on many factors. The amount of material to be analyzed. It depends on the number of researchers involved and the level of experience. It depends on the financial constraints and the long-term goals. And it depends on the availability of electronic devices in your context, where you have word scanners that you can scan, if you have word recognition software or not. And these are all factors, because these softwares that I showed you, some of them are not for free, most of them are paid software. So you make sure that you have access to them, and you have to look at the comfort level while conducting your analysis. Well, this is an example for some examples working from paper-based approaches of content analysis, whiteboard, sticky notes, Excel, Access, and more advanced sophisticated software. Previously, people were doing sticky notes when they do content analysis. So they will create maybe a workshop, or they will group people, they will all get into the document, they start to analyze it, they code the text into sticky notes, they hang it on the wall, and they start to group the different concepts, and they do the whole coding, categorization, and framework creation in a sticky note approach. Some others do it with papers. Also, a lot of researchers do use Excel, and in this sense they try to group the concept, and they try to do the analysis because they find it a software that is easy to access, and they start to group the codes and they start to link them to the text. However, it is tedious, and my advice is simply to focus on professional softwares that help you with the content analysis. So the first step always is to have initial consideration when you start your process. Identify the data that needs to be analyzed, and you look at the sources of the data, and you start to look at the words and the codes. Then you start the creation of your coding. This is step 2. Step 3 is to work on the coding data and the keywords and the key concepts that you have. You find them and you start to locate them and you start to highlight them and connect them. Then you check the reliability of your approach. You compare your codes. You look at the resolution of differences. You can get a peer or another eye of another expert looking at your coding approach. And then finally, you start to analyze your result. You look at examples. You count number of codes. You look at any cross tabs or relations, and you start to look at any incorporation of qualitative data related to your coding. So these are the general steps that you will need to address, and doing that through a software is much easier. However, if you prefer to do it through Excel or use sticky notes or even a whiteboard or a paper-based approach, it will just be more tedious. Now I'm done with my analysis and I need to validate my content analysis. As I told you before, I always say qualitative research methods are by default subjective, and I need to prove that I am not biased. So how can I avoid the bias? This is a common slide I always show, talking about the external validity and the internal validity. Do the qualitative researchers think about the reliability and the validity in the same way in quantitative researchers? Yes, in qualitative research we always look at validity similar to the quantitative research methodologies. But how can we do that? How can we avoid bias? We try to look at the credibility and confirmability, look at intention and reliability. Did we code appropriately? Did we select right terms? Do they make sense? Can we have other experts sharing their vision and revise our coding process? This is, for example, an example for internal validity. And finally, we go also for external validity. Can I generalize my outcome? Can my findings be transferable, or are they dependent on other factors? So these are all approaches. And when we do validity, we look at when selecting the content to be studies, when the sample selection methods that we are working on. So we need to first, when we do content analysis, to look at that. What is the content that I have? Is it representative or not? We need to construct the validity by using previous variables, categories, and testing new ones in the coding system. So we can try to revise our coding system and our categorization. And we check, does it make sense or not? Is the one method or our proposed structure is bringing the best out of the analysis of the content or not? So these are all approaches. And we need to ensure that the research question is answered. So this is a very important point. Also, as part of our validity for content analysis, we can use the intercoder approach. What is the intercoder? It's an independent coder that can analyze the same text using the same categorizing coding scheme and reach the same decisions, and this brings reliability and consistency. So this is obviously part of the internal validity. I can increase the internal validity of the work by inviting an intercoder, exactly like defined. Another approach that I can do something called the intracoder. And in this sense, I'm looking to the reliability within a single coder, and I ask to recode a subset of data by the same person again, to make sure that this person is consistent in his or her coding system. And here I'm looking at ensuring coding decisions that are not altered. So when we look at internal reliability in content analysis, we invite intercoder and intracoder. And with those two approaches, we can increase the quality and make sure that we have a more rigorous approach in coding, and we avoid as much as possible bias. Well, I'm going to terminate or end my presentation, and I would like to share with you some final learned lessons when we do content analysis. First of all, keep the research question always nearby so that it guides you, so that you do not get lost, because content analysis is one of those studies that are time consuming and you can easily drift or fade away while you are doing it. So always keep the research question under your eye. Content analysis is time consuming and it depends on your case. So this is very important to know, that when you are investing in content analysis, it will be time consuming, and therefore we need to use softwares that can help us and shorten this time. And especially software that can do text recognition, especially with new artificial intelligence software, this can be a potential to make it a shorter process. And if software is used to assist for the categorization and organization of data, researcher must create a highly logical coding and categorization framework. And I advise you always look at validity. The intercoder and intracoder are two approaches to make sure and assure the quality and make sure that you are avoiding bias and make sure that you have a higher internal validity of your outcomes. And as usual, always learn from other journal papers. Look at a journal paper with a title content analysis, read it well, and if it's well cited, most probably then they followed a good methodology, and then you can imitate the methodology, especially when you are doing it for the first time. So by that, I would like to end up my presentation. Content analysis is one of the desktop methods. It's one of the qualitative research methods that are used in qualitative research. I wish you the best with your research. Thank you for your attention.